Hello, this is JoLaine, minor with the Office of Community Development. Today I will be discussing compliance in three parts. Part 1, Federal Labor Standards. Part 2, Section 3 Requirements. And Part 3, Construction Management. You will need to complete each section of this training before you can certify that this training has been completed. So we'll begin the training for compliance. Part 1, Labor Standards. The documents that will be referenced in this training include the Wage Rate Determination Request Form, the request for additional classification and rate from the Department of Labor, which is the SF 1444 Standard Form 1444, the sample letter of request for conformance, which must accompany the SF 1444 form, the payroll form WH347, and the employee interview form HUD 11. You may want to pause this presentation and obtain these forms. The addresses for the website are listed below each form. The federal labor standards apply to any construction contract over $2,000 funded in whole or in part with CDBG funds. You need to assign someone the responsibility for assuring compliance with the federal labor standards. What are the federal labor standards? They are the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act, the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act, and the Davis-Bacon Prevailing Wage Act. The Copeland Anti-Kickback Act prohibits employers from forcing employees to give up any part of their wages, except for authorized payroll deductions, and requires the payrolls to be certified. QASA, or the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act, requires that laborers and mechanics be paid time and 1/2 for hours worked over 40 hours in one work week. Contractors are liable for unpaid wages and liquidated damages. The penalty for violations is $29 per day per laborer and mechanic owed. This is for willful violations and computation errors. So please make sure that you are reviewing those payrolls and catching the errors as quickly as you can. QASA also assures that no laborer or mechanic be made to work in surroundings that are unsanitary, hazardous, or dangerous. The Davis-Bacon Act requires the payment of prevailing wages to all laborers and mechanics on federally funded projects in excess of $2,000. Construction includes the alteration and/or repair, including painting and decorating of public buildings or public works. The Davis-Bacon Act stipulates that laborers and mechanics must be paid at least once per week, that they must be paid the federal prevailing wages for the work they are performing on the project. Only apprentices and trainees registered with the U.S. Department of Labor may be paid less than the prevailing wage. Foremen and supervisors are covered by the Davis-Bacon Act only when 20% or more of the time spent is performing manual work. Exclusions include project superintendents, administrative staff, executives, and clerical staff. Volunteers and force account workers are exempted from the Davis-Bacon Act. Labor standards in the bidding process. All CDBG construction projects must go through a formal bidding process. All projects subject to Davis-Bacon must be competitively bid. Even if a construction contract is $250,000 or less and is part of a federally funded project subject to Davis-Bacon, the small purchase procedures may not be used. For CDBG funded projects, bid packets must include the federal prevailing wage rates and the federal labor standards provisions, HUD 4010. For projects with mixed sources of funding, utilizing both CDBG and State of Illinois funding, HUD provided the following in its handbook dated January 2023. When a project has mixed sources of funding, the general rule is to follow the strictest of the regulations. Some states have laws that are similar to Davis-Bacon and related acts, which are sometimes referred to as Little Davis-Bacon. In these situations, the strictest of the two regulations will typically apply. If state prevailing rates are higher than the federal prevailing rates, the state prevailing rates will apply, and vice versa. Mixed source projects should include the highest prevailing wage rates and the Federal Labor Standards Provisions HUD 4010. Please note that you should keep the alternate prevailing wage rate in the file for reference and documentation. Prevailing wage rates for your CDBG funded projects must be obtained through DCEO's Labor Standards Officer. You must complete the wage rate determination request form that can be found on DCEO's website. Prevailing wage rates should be obtained at the time of bid advertisement. Please request the wage rate determination a minimum of 5 days prior to bid advertisement. This wage rate determination must be included in the bid packet. Updates can be requested 10 days prior to bid opening. You must notify all bid packet holders if there are changes in the wage rate determination. This is the lock-in wage rate determination and must be made part of the contract documents and posted at the worksite. If the contract is not awarded within 90 days of the bid opening, you must request an update. This becomes the lock-in and must be made part of the contract documents and posted at the worksite. If construction does not start within 90 days of contract award, you must request an update for construction start date, which is defined as the first day of the first payroll. The contract must be amended to include this lock-in wage rate determination, and the wage rate determination must be posted at the worksite. Okay, now we're going to move to the wage rate determination request form. If you are able to download the form, now would be a good time to have that in front of you. You will notice that it does look a little different. So we're going to go through each section. General information. Please complete all fields and check for accuracy. You must complete the date submitted, the CDBG grant number, the CDBG grantee name. Please don't include a nickname for the project. The estimated cost, the location, that's why city is listed, the county of the project for the wage rate determination, the estimated or the State of Illinois funds used with CDBG. This is for the mixed source information. The amount of that funding and which department the funding is coming from. And the type of project. Please check the appropriate box. Please indicate a complete description of work. And what rates are you requesting for? Which activity? Is this bid advertisement, bid opening, contract award, or start of construction? Please also pay attention to the notes that are indicated on this form. Please check the applicable type of classification of work for the project. Is it a heavy highway project? That is public infrastructure. Is it a building project? You would use building if it's a water or sewage treatment plant or warehouse, and only if it is for structural building modifications. Any work outside and or to the lines would make it a heavy highway project. What crafts are needed to complete the project? Please be thorough. Does your project include water lines? Are connections necessary? Will you need a plumber? Please indicate that. And then who do I send the wage rate determination request to? If it is not the person who's sending in the request, please also indicate if there's an additional person who needs this information. Wage rate determinations are processed via email. Only one wage rate determination is issued per project. If your classification is not listed, the conformance process must be used. The grantee or administrator is not allowed to pull an alternate wage rate determination because it may contain the classification you need. So wage rate conformances, additional classifications are requested when the work to be performed by the classification is not performed by a classification in the wage rate determination. The classification is utilized in the area by the construction industry, and the proposed wage rate, including fringe, bears a reasonable relationship to the wages contained in the wage rate determination. The conformance requests are not needed for bona fide apprentices, trainees, or welders unless the project is 100% welding. To bear a reasonable relationship, an example is if the contractor needs to request an additional classification for a plumber, then he must propose a wage that is comparable to those listed in the wage rate determination for other skilled workers. He cannot compare rates to laborers, truck drivers, or engineers. And he could not request a wage rate lower than that of the lowest paid worker because, again, it has to bear a reasonable relationship to the wages contained in the wage rate determination. The same process is used when a classification within the wage rate determination does not include the county in which the project location is located in. So, for example, if the plumber is located or is listed in the wage rate determination, but it does not include the county of the project, you still would use this same process when proposing to add that classification. The U.S. Department of Labor looks at the wages of other skilled trades only in the county relative to the project location. To request a wage rate conformance or request for additional classification, you will need the Department of Labor Standard Form 1444 and a letter of request on contractor's letterhead signed by the requesting contractor. These forms are sent with the lock-in wage rate determination at the time of bid opening if I am aware of the intent to use a classification that is not contained in the wage rate determination, or you can obtain these forms on DCEO's website. The process, as currently established, is that the contractor will send the completed form and letter to the grant administrator. The grant administrator will review the form and letter for completeness and email it to the Labor Standards Officer. I will then review and forward the request to the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor currently reviews requests within 30 to 45 days. The contractor should pay the subject worker the proposed rate that is on the SF 1444. Please note that wage restitution could result if the Department of Labor denies the request. Okay, now is a good time to grab the standard form 1444, the SF 1444, request for authorization of additional classification and rate, DOL standard form 1444. There is a sample on the left-hand side of your screen. We're going to go through each field that the contractor will be required to complete. There are sections of the form that are pre-filled. The top center box should always be checked as construction contract. Field 1 is always addressed to the administrator at the Wage and Hour Division, U.S. Department of Labor. Box 2 is always pre-filled with my information as the Labor Standards Officer for the CDBG program. Box 3, contractor, is where you would enter the contractor's name. 4 is where you would enter the date of the request. 5 is the contract number. This is for your reference. Box 6 is the date of the bid opening. This is a required field. 7 is the date of your contract award. This is also a required field. Box 8 is the date the contract work started, your construction start date. This is a required field if known. Box 9 is not applicable to CDBG projects. Box 10 is subcontractor's information. If you have a subcontractor working on the project, then you would enter that information here. Box 11 is the project description of work. Enter the grant number, the grantee name, and a complete description of grant-funded activities to be completed. Box 12 is the project location. Enter the city, county, and Illinois for this project. Box 13 is the wage rate determination number. Include the modification number and the date the wage rate determination was published. 13A is the proposed classification. You would list the proposed classification and a description. What is it doing? So if you look at the samples provided, the first one is plumber for line connections. If you are working with a group, then you would enter all groups needed. So the next example provided is truck driver, groups 1 through 5 with appropriate descriptions. 13B is the proposed wage rate listed for each classification requested, and 13C is the proposed fringe benefit payment for each classification listed. Line 14 is the subcontractor's signature if applicable. 15, the prime contractor's signature. This is required. 16 is the signature of employee or representative and the title of the employee or representative if available. And you would check whether the parties in boxes 14, 15, and 16 agree with the wage and fringe indicated in box 13. The letter of request for wage rate conformances must be on contractor's letterhead and signed by the contractor. The letter must include the grant number, grantee name, and project location, including the city and the county. It must include a full project description and the name of the contractor. The wage rate determination number, including the modification number and date published, and the proposed classifications and duties. Please include all group classifications in the same manner as was listed on the SF 1444. You also must include a reason the additional classifications are needed. Water line connections are necessary, plumber required for this project, or it is a 100% welding project not incidental. Please do not indicate because the wage is not listed. The proposed base wage rate, again, if it's a group, list all groups and corresponding wage requested, and the proposed fringe payment. Important notes about the prevailing wage rates. The wage rates must be included in the bid packet requested at bid advertisement. The wage rates must be included in the contract documents, including subcontracts. This is the lock-in wage rate determination. They must be posted at the work site and where employees sign in for the day. They must be in plain view and be easily accessible. They must be updated if the contract is not awarded within 90 days of the bid opening, and they must be made part of the contract. Wage rates must be updated if construction does not start within 90 days of contract award, and the contract must be amended to include new wages. The conformance process must be used for missing classifications, and the letter from DOL must be posted with the wage rate determination. Okay, now we're going to move on to payrolls. The Davis-Bacon Act requires laborers and mechanics be paid at least the federal prevailing wage for work performed and tools used at least once per week. WH 347 or an equivalent can be used for payrolls. If you are not using WH 347, then the payroll that you are using or accepting from the contractor must contain all information that is captured on the WH 347. We highly recommend numbering the payrolls. Only apprentices and trainees registered with the U.S. Department of Labor may be paid less than the federal prevailing wage. The Copeland Anti-Kickback Act prohibits employers from forcing employees to give up any part of their wages except for authorized payroll deductions. When you're reviewing your payrolls, please verify the deductions. And the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act requires payrolls be certified. If you're using an equivalent payroll to the WH 347, the certification must have the exact language that's on the WH 347, and you must verify that the correct person is signing the payrolls. Okay, so the prime contractor submits all payrolls to the administrator weekly, including the statement of compliance, certifying that the required information is provided, information is maintained, and the information is correct. Each laborer and mechanic was paid for wages earned, and laborer and mechanic was paid not less than the determined wage. On your screen is an image of the U.S. Department of Labor payroll form, WH 347. You can find written and visual instructions for this payroll on DCEO's website. If you are not using the WH 347, the equivalent payroll from the contractor must contain all information captured on the WH 347. I know that I have said this before, and I will probably repeat it again. So I'm not going to go through the entire payroll form, but I do want to make a couple of notes. Please number your payrolls. Both DOL and HUD strongly prefer and recommend that you number the payroll. The first payroll should be marked as initial, and the last payroll should be marked as final. You need to list the grant number in the project or contract number. the contractor should use the classification in the wage rate determination for the work classification. If there is a group such as truck driver, engineer, or laborer, then they need to indicate which group or class that employee is working from. It is extremely hard to identify whether the proper wage is being paid if they simply list engineer and not the group that engineer. Is it group 1? What exactly is that engineer? What work are they performing? Same thing with the truck driver. We can't very well verify that the payrolls are correct if we don't have all of the information that we need. You must verify the payrolls against the wage rate determination. If you don't have the proper classification on the payroll, then that's just downright impossible. Column 7, they can add the fringe benefit, but only if it is cash paid in lieu of fringe. So this image is the back side of the WH-347. This is the statement of compliance. So please make sure if you're using or your contractor is using a payroll other than the WH-347, all of this language, verbatim, must be used. Also, please verify that the person that is signing this payroll is authorized to sign the payroll. You should compare the payroll to the wage rate determination. The total payroll amount, which is the base plus fringe, must equal or exceed the prevailing wage rate. Any underpayments found while reviewing the payroll must be reported to the Labor Standards Officer. An owner-operator subcontractor cannot certify his own payroll. The payroll must be signed off by the prime contractor. If you have an apprentice on the payroll, you must obtain a copy of the Department of Labor's certification of enrollment in an apprentice program. You must also obtain a copy of the agreement to document the approved apprentice to journeyman ratio for the program. Please do not assume that the ratio is 1-to-1 as it is with the Illinois Department of Labor. Please remember that this is federal prevailing wage. The agreement is the one that dictates the approved apprentice to journeyman ratio. You must obtain a copy of the agreement. Employees working in split classifications. If an employee performs work in more than one trade during a work week, they can be paid the wages specified for each classification only if accurate time records showing the time spent in each classification are maintained. If accurate time records are not maintained, the employee must be paid the highest wage of all classifications of work performed. Okay, I'm going to briefly cover forced account labor. Forced account labor can be used on construction projects for the units of local government. It does not apply to employees of a water or sewer district. The grantee can hire additional help for the project, but those employees must be paid the federal prevailing wage. You must keep detailed payroll and activity reports for the employees working on the construction project. You need to submit payrolls with the quarterly reports and cash requests to support the expenses. Previous payrolls need to be submitted to verify that no changes have been made in the rate of pay for the subject workers. You need to document equipment used, including when, where, and by whom during the construction project. Construction management and employee supervision is required for forced account labor. You can obtain forms by emailing me at ceo.lso@illinois.gov. Okay, we're going to cover wage restitution. So the underpayment of wages will result in wage restitution. So the total wages base plus fringe earned according to the wage rate determination, so what they should have earned according to the wage rate determination for the classification in which they are working, minus the total wages paid by the contractor. The administrator must notify the prime contractor in writing. You need to describe the underpayments and instructions for computing and documenting restitution to be paid. The prime contractor is allowed 30 days to correct the underpayments. You must receive a corrected certified payroll. This is when it's best to number your payrolls, or it needs to have the period of the time of the restitution reflected on the payroll. It's easiest to identify if you're numbering your payrolls, because then it can be payroll number 2 versus corrected payroll number 2. It must contain the signed statement of compliance. You need to review the certified payroll, corrected certified payroll against the original payroll to make sure that the restitution is in fact corrected. Also, seek proof of payment. You want the front and back of a canceled check or the bank statement showing that the debit was made against the account. You need copies of the payrolls and the documentation, and that must be sent to the Labor Standards Officer. Okay, if during your review of the corrected certified payroll you find discrepancies, you need to notify the contractor of the discrepancies in writing. Additional payments must be made within 30 days. You should receive a corrected certified payroll B, so if you're working with payroll number 2, then it would be corrected payroll 2B. This must have the statement of compliance, and you again must fully review the corrected certified payroll against the original payroll, corrected payroll number 2, corrected payroll 2B. You need again to seek proof of payment for the additional payments to be made. And all copies of original, first corrected payroll, and second corrected payroll must be submitted to the Labor Standards Officer. You do have the right to withhold payment from the contractor to ensure the payment of wages due and unpaid are collected if wage underpayments are not corrected within 30 days after written notification, but only in the amounts needed to meet the contractor's liability. Okay, under Davis Bacon, postings at the worksite are required. You should visit the worksite to ensure that the federal prevailing wage rate decision and the notice to employee poster and knowing your rights poster are posted. To document compliance, you need to take a picture of the postings and keep them in the project file. The posters are available on DCEO's website. Also, visiting the worksite, you need to conduct employee interviews. So the employee interviews is HUD 11 form. So if you still have that stack of documents that were downloaded from the website, please take a look at HUD 11. It is also on the left-hand side of your screen. So you need to conduct several interviews of at least each craft. You need to conduct the interviews in person. We are not allowed to hold these via WebEx or telephone interviews by mail. They must be conducted in person. You must verify that the payment is consistent with the federal prevailing wage and that the employee is doing work and using tools for the craft for which they are being paid. So we're going to go through each section just very briefly. 1A and 1C is self-explanatory. 2A through 2D, you need to enter the employee's full name, telephone number, and a permanent home address. So a lot of times these employees are at temporary addresses, so you need to seek their permanent home address, and this is in case wage restitution is owed. We need to be able to contact them. Ask for an ID to verify their name. Section 3A to 4C, enter the employee's responses. Ask if the employee has a pay stub with them to verify consistency with the information provided by the employer. 5 through 7, the responses should be specific. The job classification or trade, not I'm a journeyman or a mechanic. So if you get that response, please ask for clarification. Items 8 through 12B are self-explanatory. Items 13 through 15C, what did you observe when you first came on site? Make your observations before you actually sit down to interview the employee, and be specific. Did you observe this employee working with a crew? How many were in that crew? Was the interviewee forthcoming? Make notes, be as specific as you can be. Items 16 to 17B, verify interviews against certified payrolls. And this must be signed by the interviewee. If discrepancies are found, they must be resolved. Okay, frequently asked questions. What is the site of the work? The physical place or places where the building or work called for in the contract will remain once the contracted work has been completed, and any other site where a significant portion of the building or work is constructed, provided that such site is established specifically for the performance of the contract or project. What is not a site of the work? A branch plant establishment, fabrication plants, tool yards of a contractor or subcontractor whose location and continuance in operation are determined wholly without regard to a particular federal or federally assisted contract or project. Did it exist prior to the construction project, and will it exist after? Then it is not considered to be a site of the work. Commercial or material supplier fabrication plants, batch plants, borrow pits, job headquarters, tool yards, etc., established by the supplier for the project before opening of bids, but not on the site of the work. Truck drivers. Under what circumstances are truck drivers covered under Davis-Bacon and related acts? Drivers of a contractor or subcontractor for time spent working on the site of the work. Drivers of a contractor or subcontractor for time spent loading and or unloading materials and supplies on the site of the work if such time is not de minimis. If multiple trips in a day are made and the time on site exceeds 20% of the driver's time for the day, then Davis-Bacon applies. Please make note of this. Truck drivers transporting materials or supplies between a facility that is deemed part of the site of the work and the actual construction site, and truck drivers transporting portions of the building or work between a site established specifically for the performance of the contract or project where a significant portion of such building or work is constructed, and the physical places where the building or work called for in the contract will remain. Under what circumstances are truck drivers not covered under Davis-Bacon and related acts. Material delivery truck drivers while off the site of the work. Drivers of a contractor or subcontractor traveling between a Davis-Bacon job and a commercial supply facility while they are off the site of the work, and truck drivers whose time spent on the site of the work is de minimis. Remember, less than 20% of their total time, such as only a few minutes at a time merely to pick up or drop off materials or supplies. Less than 20% cumulative for the day if they're making multiple trips. Okay, the links listed are the most recent for the Contractor's Guide to Prevailing Wage Requirements for federally assisted construction projects and the Davis-Bacon and Labor Standards Addendum for the construction projects for contractors that were released by HUD. In addition, the most recent copy of the Federal Labor Standards provision also provided by HUD. Please make sure that you are checking the website for the most current information to be provided to the contractors. Just a quick note about CDBG economic development projects. Davis-Bacon does apply. Davis-Bacon applies to all construction activities using CDBG funds, whether on public or private property. If the CDBG economic development grant is for a construction project, Davis-Bacon applies. Infrastructure improvements for the benefit of a business, direct capital investment to a business for building improvements, installation and purchase of equipment, or construction cost and leased improvements. Construction includes the alteration and or repair, including painting and decorating of public buildings or public works. Davis-Bacon applies to any construction contract over $2,000. So please remember these things if you're working on a CDBG economic development project.